Hi, welcome to the New Voting Project. My name is Kunal, your host, and today we're here with Madison Mandell, the co-founder of Brown University Votes, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this like the Swear Center of
Swear.
Swear like profanity. Okay, Swear Center Civic Engagement Fellow at Brown. You're also, I guess, a junior and a half, something like that, at the university. So no, it's great to have you here with us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here and I'm really excited for this conversation. And thank you for the incredible work that you do.
Of course, of course. So yeah, no, let's get into it. For our viewers, talk a little bit about your background, touch on how your studies at Brown are going, and of course your future career.
Yeah, so as we discussed, I'm a junior and a half currently at Brown, and I am a history concentrator. So I have a lot of reasons as to why I chose to study history in particular. A lot of it does have to do with what I want to do in the future. I definitely am very interested in the civil rights, civil liberties space. Obviously, voting rights as being fundamental to that. And I think a big problem that I constantly run into and notice is sort of a lack of understanding of history when it comes to sort of policy making, when it comes to those discussions about current events. And it's very important for me to have historical context to be able to understand everything happening in the present and what's going to happen even in the future. Learning from past mistakes to avoid repeating them. And I think that's been really helpful. Also, Brown University has an open curriculum, so I've really been able to take courses from a wide variety of disciplines. And I think being able to kind of, view issues from different like pedagogies and viewpoints, different kind of academic approaches has been really helpful as well. And I think it will serve me in whatever I end up doing in the future.
Mhm.
So that's kind of, yeah, that's definitely how, my education now is hopefully shaping what I'll do.
Yeah, and what would you want to do in the future before we get into the conversation?
I'm not entirely sure yet, but definitely think I want to go into law. I think that obviously there are challenges in the legal field in terms of enacting change, but I think that there are ways to kind of engage responsibly in that and to use the law as a tool for change, and also having a good understanding of the law to be able to prevent abuse of the law, if that makes any sense.
No, it makes complete sense. I actually, a lot of close friends of mine are like civil rights lawyers, so trust me, I know where you're coming from.
Yeah. And
Um,
actually, I interned with the ACLU of Connecticut for the past year, and that's definitely been very inspirational and has shown me kind of a potential, career path there.
yeah, no, the ACLU is a good place to start. Um, but yeah, no, that's great. Thank you so much for that information. But I wanted to ask, I guess, preeminently, you've entered kind of the political sphere
Mhm.
in some sort. So why do that? Why go the political route? You're obviously interested in law. And what specifically drew you to like activism and community organizing, voting rights, etc.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So I think kind of with my initial interest in the political sphere emerged at a very young age. So on my mom's side of the family, my grandparents came from Cuba. So they kind of fled oppression there to come to the United States. And so I grew up hearing those stories about, and my awareness of political systems and injustice was definitely heightened. And I think I kind of took that kind of carried, through with me. And I also live in a place. So I'm from New Haven,
Oh,
Connecticut, and there's a lot of community organizing that happens there. And I think I was very inspired by that growing up as well, and seeing how kind of like on a very local level, political activism and just mobilization in that sense could really be, could really implement, change could really come from that. Really drive change. And I think that was very like that energy was inspiring to be around for sure. Um,
yeah, no, local change is the best
yeah,
in my opinion. I've worked a lot locally, so trust me, I know the feeling.
yes,
It's where you can really touch it. Uh,
exactly, exactly.
but I guess on the topic of activism, what are the not like macro scale, but like what are the core values, the policy objectives you're hoping to accomplish not only with Brown votes? Kind of explain what you do, with brown votes and I guess voting rights as a whole? You've obviously worked for the ACLU, so you have some legal interest. Like, what is it that you want to advocate for long term?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think really what it boils down to for me has always been sort of like equality, and representation, and being able to influence society, in a way that, is equal, in a way that everyone's voice is valued. And I think those sort of undergird like the work that I do and that I want, what I want to see in the future. I definitely think that voting rights is sort of like a stepping stone and an important thing to have guaranteed in order for other sort of like bigger policy objectives to be accomplished as well. So that's kind of why I have so many, I can go into that, as I said, for hours, talk about all the policies that I'd like to see be implemented. But I think really what kind of has driven me to voting rights in particular is that sort of is, the foundation of all of that, in my opinion, a big part of the foundation of that change to come. And like regardless of what policies you want to see be implemented, like it all starts there. So I think that's been a way for me to feel sort of like being able to engage with a bunch of different issues in a centralized way and focus my efforts into one place. And I think that's definitely why I've been especially drawn to voting, for those kind of two reasons that I mentioned. And obviously in the future, I'd like to see a lot more voter accessibility legislation being passed. The restoration of the Voting Rights Act in particular, like passing the John Lewis Voting Rights Act would be incredible. That's a first step in the right direction there. And I think kind of as we're seeing sort of an assault on our democracy right now with a lot of voter suppression legislation being passed, I'd like to see sort of the opposite of that, obviously.
Right. Yeah, no, I could definitely agree. But it seems those are some heavy tasks.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, no, good luck. Good luck. No. Well, we got to stick together. It's a movement. Am I right?
Exactly. I mean, I think that's really what's important at the end of the day, is kind of a lot of what I do is bringing people together who have the knowledge, because I personally don't have, so much knowledge or anything like that. And I think it's all about bringing together like a diverse group of people that can bring their own skill sets to the table and working together and accomplishing those bigger goals.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty defined purpose. The one thing I would add is that running for office is going to answer a lot of those questions. Just a tip there. I know some great campaign managers. But no, let's kind of hone in on voting rights.
Yes.
Let's look at 2020.
Okay.
What are your thoughts? Any lessons you learned? It was a crazy year, pandemic, top to bottom on ballot, votes, and I guess where you are, what work you did. Why did you start Brown Votes? Actually, why do that? Because I'm sure it was spiraling out of 2020.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. It actually, a lot of it for me started in 2018 during the midterms. And I think being a student on this campus, especially at Brown, I expected a lot more sort of discussion, engagement on voting in general. And I think that was kind of lacking, in my opinion. And we started noticing, a couple of my peers and I started noticing that we looked at our NSOLV data. Are you familiar with NSOLV?
Yeah. I am actually supposed to have Nancy on the show very soon.
Oh, she's amazing. I've talked to her before. Yes, I've actually talked to her before. And yeah, so I think that, we kind of reviewed past NSOLV data and everything like that, and noticed that there were some, it was incredible, the data that showed how, few students were actually participating and in big elections too, not even in like municipal elections, where I almost expected the turnout to be low, but I was very shocked at that. And so along with Kimberly Collins, who is a tremendous organizer, advocate, does it all, we kind of started collaborating with the Swear Center, identified this problem on campus, and wanted to see a big change in sort of democratic engagement at large on campus, and kind of a prioritization of that from our institution. And we know that is in line with like the values that, our institution preaches. And we thought that there was a little bit of a disconnect there. And we wanted to kind of ensure that was being, that was at the forefront. And so we worked with the Swear Center, who was our like public service center, and they were extraordinarily helpful getting things, getting the ball rolling on that. And then we kind of just started recruiting a bunch of students as well, because obviously a lot of students are very passionate about the same issue. And definitely kind of began with because it began in the spring of like when the pandemic started hitting, that was definitely a huge challenge. And obviously the election was coming up huge elections were coming up in the fall. So we definitely had to kind of get everything together quickly and mobilize very quickly. So I think that definitely kind of shaped the direction of our organization at first, the fact that we had such a big, event coming up. But yeah, that's kind of some context on that.
And so how is, I guess, coming off of that, how did it turn out at Brown? Because I'd expect, the Ivy League education, no offense, would also include, emphasis on liberal arts, which is what they proclaim
Yes.
they do. So, I was astonished when I heard from like Kevin and Zach and Patrick, who have also been on the show. I'm plugging my own material right now. They talked about it being virtually non-existent at their university.
Yeah.
I was shocked. I was like, shit, I'm paying Harvard like CGs. I'm trying to learn a little something more than what the classroom can provide. So,
right.
What were your thoughts coming into that? And then of course, coming out of 2020.
Yeah. So I think coming into it again, you and me both, I was shocked as well. And honestly, a little bit very disappointed. And I think it wasn't so much that there was a lack of interest in that. It was just kind of like, there was just no sort of foundation for it. And it took a group of students like us to kind of say, okay, we want this and we're going to push for this. And then our, administration has been very supportive ever since and everything like that. Yeah. And actually, I personally have been doing research with out of like Johns Hopkins, actually the Agora Institute. And I've been doing kind of a review of democratic engagement at institutions of higher education. And a really big theme has been, sort of like this complete lack of engagement. 2020 hits, all of a sudden this becomes like a hot button issue. Everyone wants to start, get going on this. And what that really means going forward and how to, let's talk about sustainability of these efforts. Let's talk about, everything like that. So it's been very interesting to kind of speak to, tons of students and learn from and hear their perspectives on their own institution and how they have gotten these efforts up and running. And hopefully, now I'm going to plug something. The report that we're creating is sort of a very good tool for innovative practice sharing, addressing the challenges in the space, and hopefully a guide that will, take what we learned from 2020 and other elections and organizing. I mostly say 2020 because a lot of schools, institutions, initiatives really did sort of flourish in 2020, and then apply that going forward.
Yeah, no. What is this report associated with?
So it's out of the Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins.
Okay.
Scott Warren, who is the former CEO, or he is the CEO of Generation Citizen. Okay. We worked together on this report. Yeah.
Yeah, no, when it comes out, love to have you back on the show. It's going to do that at the end, but yeah, no, that's another reason I wanted to get NSolve involved with the New Voting Project, is because I want an abundance of data to analyze and look at when it comes to young people voting. So that is very, very forthcoming. It's very imminent. But no, if Scott would like to come on, you and Scott, talk about the report, I'm sure viewers would appreciate a little bit more insight on the research of voting data. But before we get to that, because that might take some time.
Yes.
With Brown votes, why do you think there's such a lack of engagement at higher learning institutions? And this is where folks go to learn. They pay thousands of dollars, probably, hundreds of thousands in student debt, and they're not getting taught the simple basic principle of voting. Yeah. Why do you think that happens?
Well, first of all, I think that it's important to think of, democratic engagement like very holistically, and voting as like a step toward that.
Yeah, I'd have to agree.
Right, exactly. And I think that it's the fact that we don't even have that baseline of, everyone participating civically who can by voting is definitely very jarring. I think it comes down to a lot of different things, honestly, for different people. There's not sort of like one general explanation for as to explain the low turnout rates. But I think part of it definitely is apathy, feeling as though, one's vote actually does not carry any weight and can actually enact change. I think it's like sort of like a lack of information where students feel as though they aren't really informed enough to be able to cast their vote. And that's, there's a lot of information that is not really accessible. And that's a very big problem, both locally and, nationally. But I think that people who aren't really participating just don't really see it as something that is going to make a big difference in their lives or others' lives. And I think that's really the root of the problem. And it's really showing people like it's not that people don't care about issues, right? They do. And it's really about connecting the issues they care about to electoral politics. And that's where I think there's like a disconnect sometimes. And I think that sort of the values of, really focusing on issue-based, like mobilization around issues is probably way more effective than trying to convince my fellow like youths that it's a civic duty to vote and everything like that. And I think, when there's a system that we might not necessarily fully buy into, it's that kind of rhetoric can be almost off-putting in a sense. And I think that that's been sort of like a traditional way to mobilize. And I think that we need to reimagine that and reinvent that.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point about civic duty and public service. One thing I'd have to say is the best way to get folks mobilized is to relate the issue back to them.
Exactly.
I didn't care. Vaguely speaking, I didn't activate myself until I saw and I physically understood and acclimated myself to the situation. Then I said, okay, something needs to be done, right? On climate change, on everything. And I think to your point, most voters are either alienated, exhausted, like you said, apathetic, and purist, which is something I've learned more about. I had a renowned author, Paul Loeb, whose book I would recommend to any upcoming activist, Soul of a Citizen. And he talks about the fact that we're so pure. We think if I can't solve the entire issue of voting rights or the entire issue of climate change, I can't do anything about it. And it's the purest mindset that actually deters us from, like you said, our civic duty. So yeah, that's just something to think about, something to ruminate on. But no, it is right. Issue-based politics, not identity-based politics. Please avoid that, please. I say, there's a very colloquial term that I use is like, somebody asked, the Jen Psaki, who is the press secretary, who is the head of the Small Business Administration, and the first thing she responded with was, it's a South Asian woman. And I'm like, that has nothing to do with the actual work the SBA does. It's just, identity-based politics and cultural identity that really influences what we do. But no, that's all great. I also wanted to quickly mention, how was Brown involved in the Ivy League Votes Challenge? Because I know that's like a spectrum across all 8 universities. So if you want to touch on the work y'all did.
Yeah. So listen, about that, I really think what was valuable. So essentially what it was a information sharing, resource sharing coalition, essentially dedicated to the same mission of improving voter turnout on our campuses. And where I think it was very effective was exactly what I just said, as creating a network of like-minded and passionate individuals who had different vantage points on everything, diverse group of individuals with different backgrounds that can contribute differently. And I think that kind of information sharing and just learning from one another has proved invaluable to the work that at least Brown Votes has done. And those connections that we've facilitated have, outlasted that the time that we were really focused on that coalition. And I'm still in touch with all the people that you mentioned before, and our work still together continues. We're always looking for new ways to kind of innovate in this space. And I think that at the end of the day, it was a window into what improved channels of communication in the space could unlock. At the end of the day, like, there's no need to, if one institution is doing something very, very well, there's no need to sort of, keep that separate. Like, share the wealth, share the knowledge. Others can certainly benefit from that. And obviously there are different contexts at every institution of higher learning, but a lot of times sort of like good ideas can be adapted to fit into other contexts. So I think really the benefit of that was that network that was created and the information and resource sharing.
Of course, yeah, no, I think it's very valuable. Like you said, some it could be invaluable, like you said. I'm gonna ask you a very simple question.
Yeah.
You should only have one answer. Is voting important?
Yes.
It's a good answer. Let's move on from that now. No, you can explain. You can explain why.
I'm glad I can unpack that a bit.
Yeah.
As I said, again, I always like to think about democratic engagement in a very holistic way, but if you don't, voting is the bedrock of that. And I think that, again, tying it back to something I mentioned earlier about like my values and in terms of, being able to influence what's happening in your community beyond that is where voting comes into the picture. Like, obviously it's one step of many, but it is a crucial step. And that is one way to have your voice heard. It is the bedrock of democracy. And in order, democracy is very fragile, as we've seen. 2020 is a perfect example of that. And if you do not actively work to uphold it and maintain it, it is fleeting. And I think voting is one way that we can really strengthen and uphold our democracy and make sure that, everyone is being represented in some senses. Obviously, it's not a perfect system, and that's not, we're going to work to get closer to that. But voting is very much the most important, fundamental first step in that process of enacting change.
Yeah, it's not the silver bullet.
No, definitely not.
It's like I say, it's the first step. Every chapter of a book has the first page. It's probably the first page for a lot of folks. And maybe that's your whole chapter. But exactly. That's at least the bare minimum. Like you said, if we're not at an equal level playing field where we know every citizen votes, we can't make change because we don't even know what you want.
Exactly.
You just tell me, it's like, just tell me what you want. It's the first question, actually. It's a pro tip. First question I ask any politician, any political candidate, anybody I meet, what do you want? From me, from the public, from your service, from your job, from your education. What do you want? Because that is what I need to know to make our lives easier, right? Yeah. By the way, I charge like too much, so that's a pro tip. Free advice. Take it. Don't leave it. No, I'm playing. But let's see. In states like right now, Texas, Georgia, Republican conservative state legislators are passing laws that restrict voting, voter suppression, accessibility. Obviously, the folks in the majority want to keep their majority.
100%.
It's easy to put A and B together. How do we counteract that? How does Brown votes play into that? How does youth? How does Gen Z? What are your thoughts on voter suppression right now?
Yeah. I mean, as I said, we are living through, an extreme assault on our democracy. And this suppression is horrifying to see. It is unsurprising in the sense that there was so much rhetoric surrounding the election being quote unquote fraudulent. And I can see how, people took that rhetoric and ran with it in order to try to legitimize, in some sense, the legislation, the voter suppression legislation that they would like to pass. It's a very clear agenda, like you said, for a majority to hold power and stay in power. As in terms of what we can do as individuals, obviously these are very, very big, systemic issues at play, but there definitely are ways that as individuals and as groups we come together collectively to fight this. And for example, currently Brown Votes is engaged in the Let Rhode Island Vote Coalition. So essentially it's a coalition of organizations dedicated to increasing voter accessibility, so supporting voter accessibility legislation. So Rhode Island is actually one of 2 states to still have a notary slash witness requirement for mail ballots.
Right. Yeah, I've heard about that. That's in Mississippi too, apparently.
So
That's a lot of states.
And we're a blue state, and yet we still have a wide array of policies that make it very difficult to vote in the state, especially by mail. We are really hoping for a sort of codification of the 2020 changes that increased accessibility due to the pandemic. In terms of sustainability purposes, it would be great to have them codified and, not have to have special measures being passed every year to increase accessibility. So this coalition is really working on supporting two pieces of legislation, the Let RI Vote Act, and that is something, that individuals can partake in. That is something where you can show up and testify. I testified, a lot of my peers testified, they showed up, they helped with the social media campaign. There are definitely ways to stay involved. So definitely look out for campaigns that are promoting voter accessibility legislation, especially in these areas where there's need for improvement, or even legislation is being passed that is restricting and suppressing the vote. Another thing I would recommend is just staying informed and spreading awareness, because that's definitely a good first step, is to, it's kind of, I think it's people's responsibilities to stay informed on that, and know what's happening in your state and nationally as well. And do your part to spread awareness on it, bring attention to it, like have these conversations. Why is this happening? Let's not beat around the bush here. Let's dig into let's get into it. Why is there such a desire to suppress, votes? And I think it's important to have those conversations. So whether that be writing an op-ed, whether that be even discussing it on a really small scale, discussing it with your friends at dinner. I mean, everything is important. Those conversations are important. You never know where that's going to lead. So I really encourage people to kind of stay informed, spread awareness in any way that, you're capable of doing. And also, there are tremendous groups out there doing work, and there are ways to support their efforts. So part of staying informed is learning about, understanding the space, who's, in the space, what groups are doing this work, how can you support their efforts, how can you bring key stakeholders together. Those are definitely some things that I think that we can think about as individuals.
Yeah, no, I'd have to agree. The one, I did all the conventional stuff in high school. I'm a senior now, so I get to say that. But I really transcended it when I started working on campaigns. Like I actually did it. That's kind of how I got here. So yeah, guess you're right. If you have the interest, you have the fire, you seem a lot more energized and more, you remind me of me a couple years ago. I feel so old. Like I've been telling a lot of people that I feel so old. It's you approach burnout as an organizer too much. And so it's really good to see young people like yourself go out there and work. Us oldies, us old folk, we really got to just collect the Social Security and move on. But yeah, no, you're right. Now, how can folks stay updated on Brown Votes and what you do? If you want to link your socials, I'll add them in the description. But
I want to make one more point about youth engagement that I think is particularly important before I get into that.
Make two more points.
Okay.
Yeah.
What you were talking about burnout and everything, that made me think, and just how young people can get involved in this work, that might seem so detached and out of reach. When it comes to young people in this work, I think that, well, first of all, I do think that 16-year-olds should be allowed to vote. I think that when it comes to particularly municipal elections, for example, when we're voting on, school board, these are people attending the school and they're not able to vote on that. And that is a fundamental issue for me. And I think it speaks volumes on sort of lack of, again, representation on issues that are affecting people. And I really think that building sort of a culture, I think it's habit building, it's habit formation, and starting people at a young age to start thinking critically and thinking, civic mindedly is so important in order to see that continue throughout the rest of their lives. If that's not sort of ingrained at a young age, I really think that it's hard to get those people to consistently participate civically. And I think it's such an opportunity that institutions have, whether that be, middle schools, whether that be high schools, whether that be institutions of higher education. They all have an opportunity to really start, really discussing those values and engaging that population of students. And even students who are not eligible to vote, there are many ways for them to be involved democratically as well and engaged. And at the end of the day, for me, it's really important to start locally in your own local context. And I think as young people, local politics probably does not seem like the most appealing thing to be interested in. And what's happening in your let's just say you live in a town and there's town drama and politics, everything like that seems so unimportant. But starting to think about that early on can definitely be vital for habit formation. And it is important. And I think setting those sort of, like, you start locally and you think, okay, how can I impact my local community? Like, I want to first understand my local community. I want to understand it historically. I want to, understand all the different types of people that live here and what they want and their needs and everything like that. And then, really getting engaged, seeking out information as best as possible, participating civically when possible. And then hopefully that understanding and sort of like information gathering transcends the local context and happens for all elections.
Yeah. I mean, I got nothing, but that all made sense. It's like the analogy I always use is they taught us our ABCs when we were in kindergarten. So probably teach us to vote around the same time, maybe give or take 10 years. So yeah, no, our education system, a lot of things come back to the flaws of our education system. And higher learning, you could even extend. And even our society, we don't emphasize the benefits, the advantages of voting, right? Because let me tell you, the president is not doing much for day-to-day the average American. He's really not. He's focusing on big picture items. He's trying to get large infrastructure deals passed or voting rights legislation passed, but he's not helping, your roads get built. Maybe the funding is, but even that's your local congressperson, right? You got to vote for them. You got to vote for your city budget. You got to vote for the city council. You want to vote for the county budget. You want to know why you can't get from A to B in 2 different counties? Well, it's because the county's failing, transportation services. That's why. You want to know why Black and brown folks get arrested at a higher rate than, other people, like white people? Because the DA is not doing shit about it. So, candidly speaking, of course.
No, 100%. I completely agree. And I'm really pushing people, I think brown votes are one of our big focuses this semester is how do we help people understand their local context better? Who are the actors? Who are the key actors in your local context? What elected officials are actually doing, what are their responsibilities, and why voting for them actually matters, and where you can make change and impact that. So I completely agree with you. And I think that is totally missed with a lot of people. And a lot of it is intentional. I mean, a lot of local, it's suppression in a lot of senses, where there were some, in my hometown, local elections that were happening, and I was trying to stay informed, and I did everything I could to learn about who was running, but there was no information published about the candidates running. And I think that part of that, we have to question that too. Like, why isn't there this information out there either? So part of it is about seeking it out, and part of it is about understanding perhaps there are some underlying reasons why that information is not accessible.
Yeah, no, definitely. But no, it's been a really great chat. Do plug your socials.
Yeah.
If you want, or at least on Brown Votes. I'm sure y'all are going to do great things.
Thank you so much. Yeah, definitely check out @Brown Votes on Instagram. We have a Facebook page.
Y'all got to get a Twitter. Y'all have a Twitter?
We have a Twitter.
Some people don't have Twitter. I'm like,
we do. Okay, and check out our website, brownvotes.org.
Yeah, it'll all be in the description. So.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely.
Is there anything you want to add before we close out?
I think that one more thing I want to add is that historically, I think that a lot of times sort of like racial equity and anti-racism has not been at the forefront of this work, and it needs to be, and that's just a non-negotiable. And I really like to see institutions of higher education not have that be sort of a second thought, but rather be the foundation of their efforts. And that's something that is discussed in the report that I'm working on as well. But I think that that's fundamental, and that's something that I personally really want to see going forward.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, no, and I wasn't kidding. If you and Scott want to come back on, I recommend this to everybody. If you're working on a new project, a new idea, in this realm, be my guest. I'd love to learn more. Trust me.
Yeah, I think that that would be really great. And I think it would be great to kind of, on a sort of logistical level, learn about sort of the intricacies of this work in the higher ed space. So hopefully that would be helpful for listeners who are trying to get into this work. Because I do think this is another thing, like there are a lot of barriers to entry in this space. And I think we need to kind of make the space as inclusive as possible and take down those barriers. And part of that is being very transparent about information sharing and network building and everything like that.
Right. And I should mention, you're the reason that on vote day in Brown, there was no classes, right?
So I cannot give myself that much credit.
Okay.
Definitely the students were vocal about that, and I think that did contribute to it. It ultimately did come down to a faculty vote, and our president, President Paxton, was also very passionate about this. But I do think that that's very important because it did really demonstrate to our students that democratic engagement is an institutional priority here. And it was very important too for staff and faculty to have that day off to be able to vote as well. So I do think for many reasons, culture-wise, but also logistically, that was very important. And I'm glad that sort of students spoke up and through ground votes kind of expressed their desire to have that be implemented going forward.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's kind of the reason I wanted you to come on, is because you made that happen, even at such a microscopically looking, like it's a nominal thing, but it made a big difference, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's one domino at a time.
Exactly.
But no, yeah, no, thank you so much for coming on. I really, this part of the show, I want to get that collegiate youth perspective, folks who are doing it at every level, because it really has to add up. It's not, you do it all or I do it all. It's we all do it together. And I want to make that clear going forward. So no, thank you so much for coming on the show. Your insight is of course great. Your energy is great. I feel so old. Yeah, no, I gotta get the energy up. I gotta get some protein.
Well, I'd like to give a shout out to my whole team at Brown Boats, because I truly would not have the same energy and passion if they weren't there alongside me every step of the way, and the Swear Center supporting us too. So shout out to all of them, because really none of this would have happened at Brown without any of them.
Yeah, no, shout out to them, I guess. But no, yeah, no, I hope you take care, of course. Like I said, come back on the show when it's ready. Love to look at the report.
Would love to, and thank you again for the work that you're doing. It's incredible, and I hope that more young people can get involved and stay active in this work.
Oh yeah, we'll make it happen.
Awesome.
No, yeah, take care, Madison.
Thank you. Bye.